You are listening to the podcast Women Ending War, where you will hear the voices of Israeli and Palestinian women dedicating their lives to creating a new reality in this land. Welcome. Thanks for joining us.
Hello, Tammy. How are you?
Hey, Elana, how are you? Thanks for inviting me over.
My pleasure. Tammy Shel Aboody, Dr.
Yeah,
Tammy Shel Aboody. We
thank you.
we met at a podcast we did. It was in season 2, I want to say, where we talked with Dr. Fahira Haloon, also our mutual friend and my
Mm-hmm.
often co-host, where we talked about like a lot of super interesting things. And
Mm-hmm.
it was we had like as part of the conversation we sort of started to get into gender and the complexities of doing this gender work and the complexities of saying women, we want a safe space for women, we want a place for empowering women, all those things. Some of the complexities started to come out, and I really thought we really have
Mm-hmm.
to continue this conversation.
Thank you.
Yeah.
It's a broad topic. There
Yeah.
is no question about it.
Yeah.
And I think the other mutual topic we had in mind, actually two, I would say that they are actually intersectionality, but I think
Yeah.
it's about education and cultures and
Right.
multiple cultures.
Yes.
So the integration of all these factors are very dominant in our conversation, and
Yeah.
I know in your research as much as in mine.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, I do work on women all the time, and I create spaces for
Mm-hmm.
women all the time. And sometimes I get pushback about it too from feminist
Mm-hmm.
friends who I love and respect, who are ready to say like, why do we want all women's spaces? What's the benefit of all women's spaces? Which I also share an ambivalence about. In my first book, I wrote about this, about my ambivalence about all women's spaces. My book is called the Men's Section, and it's about Orthodox men. And one of the I wrote in my epilogue a whole about my own experiences in all women's prayer groups. The men's section is about men, Orthodox men who pray in partnership minyanim place.
Interesting.
Yeah. So one of the things that I discovered, so my research was about these partnership minyanim, and partnership minyanim are places
Mm-hmm.
that try to expand the role of women in what is fundamentally a patriarchal space, which is an Orthodox synagogue.
Mm-hmm.
Women don't count for a quorum, and women can't even say they can't lead in the more important the prayer is, the less likely a woman is allowed to lead in it. The only places women can lead are places that are considered less important, like literally that's what happens. So on the other hand, it's a space where like they're sort of trying, there's like a certain consciousness about it. And so at the end of writing that book, which raised a lot of hard things for me, I had come back from an all women's prayer group, right? Because I sort of felt like, okay, I want to be in a space with this all women, because only in the all women prayer groups do women do all of the leading. And like, so for instance, I looked at, there's a part of that in the prayer where you lift up the Torah, which is sort of like a physically difficult task. And in many
Mm-hmm.
partnership minyanim, it's like it's still considered a man's job, because it's like a
Mm.
but when you go to an all women space, women are doing that too. There's no question like, oh, we're not going to invite a man to do the lifting of the Torah. Of course, it's going to be a woman doing it.
When you say all women's place, do you mean like in an Orthodox synagogue or in a different setting?
Well, all of it. Like, so what I'm saying is that it raised issues for me, because on the one hand, the all
Mm-hmm.
women space was still inferior in the sense that we weren't allowed to count in the quorum. But on the other hand, it was like, oh, but we're lifting the Torah, so we lead everything. So I'm just giving you that like as a backdrop to just share that, I have a lot of ambivalence about doing all women's things. And yet here I am doing an all women's podcast, for example, really trying to elevate the voices of women and inviting women and talking about women's leadership and working with Forum 1325, which is all about bringing women. And I did my doctorate in gender studies and, all of that.
Mm-hmm.
So I wanted to hear a little bit from you. And so you in that podcast, you had sort of said something about like your own ambivalence about that. So I'd love to hear from you. Sorry for the long introduction, but I would, yeah, I didn't intend to actually say all that, but I was just trying to say that I really was super interested to hear from you, like what are some of your like thoughts about what it means to create like this women's podcast or women's spaces in general? Like, what are your thoughts about the benefits or the challenges of that work?
while you were talking about women's space and you were talking about orthodoxy, because I know you grew up in
Yeah.
Orthodox environment, right, in
Yeah.
Brooklyn,
Yeah.
which is another thing I would like to talk to you about your book, about your growing up. Um, I was thinking that, um, in many ways, it's manifestation of the entire region and maybe worldwide that it's an Orthodox synagogue, because eventually, well, if you look in Israel, the Knesset, right? Like you have 120 members of the parliament, out of it, two parties that there are three that joined to two. Don't allow women to enter politics. So, what are the odds that women can have a larger number of presences inside the Knesset, So 120, it's not enough. It's not a lot. Out
Yeah.
of it, 18 do not, 18, I think, right? They have 18 votes,
Yeah, something
seats,
like that. But you
right?
see, so that's interesting what you're saying, because what you're saying is that, like, in this Knesset, there's one quarter, basically a quarter of the Knesset that doesn't
Right.
even allow women. On the
Exactly.
but on the other hand, the other three
Right.
quarters, women are still a minority. Like, so
Right.
in the religious camp, it's official, or at least the Haredi camp, it's official
Yeah.
that women aren't allowed. And the rest of it, it just sort of like happens from sort of like all kinds of subconscious bias. So which is worse, or which is worse, where a
Yeah.
culture which says officially women are not allowed, or a culture which tries to say, oh yes, we're all liberated and enlightened and modern, and oh yeah, we don't have a lot of women because whatever reason they want to cite.
But how can it be? I mean, this country is identified as Jewish prior to being democratic. And
Mm.
it's not the problem only that it's Jewish, it's by what standards. And if it's Orthodox standards, and it's not even
Yeah.
about the religion, it's about business. I mean, I don't think these rabbis represent any religion. They represent patriarchal power and clinging to this power, wielding to power. That's all they represent. So it's maybe we can say to now from eternity that it's a democratic country, but we cannot say that when the identity of this country is Jewish by orthodoxy,
Yeah.
institutionalized
Yeah.
religious orthodoxy
Yeah.
domination. Even if I think nowadays you can be conservative in conversion to be entitled for
Not
right
not clear.
right of birth.
Not
I think
clear.
the
Yeah.
Supreme Court had something just before the other elections, but I'm not an
Yeah.
expert, but
Well,
I
what
I
happens
think
in the
that
Supreme Court, what the Supreme Court says and what happens on the ground are two, not
yeah,
necessarily.
yeah, of course,
Yeah.
it's two separate things for
Yeah.
sure, and not to talk about reforms that they are on the
Yeah.
outcast
Mm,
completely.
yeah.
The problem is there are several concerns that I have. Number one, that epistemologically we are being brought up to assume that being authentic Jew is by Orthodox standards. So even Jews who consider themselves supposedly liberal, supposedly non-religious or secular, I am not sure how much they really accept someone who is reform as Jew, as
Yeah.
authentic Jew,
Yeah.
or conservative. It's so ingrained and entrenched in our subconscious in a way that you cannot even question that it's like this is how you are being trained. Our this is what I'm talking about, occupation, cognitive and emotional occupation.
Mm,
This is how we are being trained to think about being Jew from a very young age.
mm,
It's not exclusive to Jews. I have to say, me, I'm talking about humanity.
mm,
And now we focus on Jews, but of course, in every society, there is some domination of thought that being governed and on us from a very young age, and we don't even question that.
yeah.
So, I mean, even if you think of the idea of the mezuzah, why do we have to have a mezuzah in Israel? Wasn't the mezuzah a symbol that was for exile or diaspora that you have to show here I'm Jewish, but here you're majority Jewish people? So what I'm saying is that these symbols, for me, in my opinion, also reflect the power relation of gender,
Mm,
because it's very patriarchal uh, outlook on Judaism in general, and about the nation and about this country.
Yeah, the fact, in other words, what you're saying is that the fact that in most people's minds, even non-religious Jews, when they think about Judaism, they're thinking about orthodoxy, which is by
Right,
definition this patriarchal system, which is completely dominated by men, where women don't have authority and
exactly,
women don't count, and all of that.
exactly.
That's what people think of as Judaism, and that's what they think is the
Yeah,
most that has influenced
yeah.
Israel, because in Israel, that's what counts as being Jewish. So, like, it's this,
And
yeah.
absolutely. And the thing is that the Orthodox communities, not only the religious communities,
Mhm.
have an advantage sometimes over urban, or I don't know how to call us. We're not, I don't know if there is something like this individualist in the sense of purely individualist, of course not. But when you come from a very tight and close congregation community, the influence is very broad. And so, for example, how can you convince a man walk on the street not to wear, forget what do you call it?
The tefillin.
Escape my mind. Tefillin, yeah,
Uh-huh.
the tefillin. So some men pass by, they put a tefillin, and they think this is Judaism, but this is Orthodox in many ways who stand by the table, Chabad or Orthodox Jews. Or if you walk on
And
the
also, when
street
you're
in
walking down, like, it's really annoying, actually, because they're
yeah,
standing there and they only approach
yeah,
men. Like, if a woman would
only
walk up and
approach men.
say, "Oh,
Exactly,
I want to put on tefillin too,"
exactly,
it would be like, "Oh,
exactly,
yeah,
exactly. It's only men. It's again men's domination,
yeah."
and then men stand by the table. And if you have women, they only give you candles for
Right.
Saturday,
So, I had
right?
this conversation actually a couple of days ago with this group that I'm working with that's looking to do, like, connecting Jewish identity after October 7th and all of that. And they're not religious at all, right? They're not religious at all. They're just trying to, they say that they're trying to, like, repair rifts and bring people together. And they said, yes, but in order to do this properly, we really have to bring a man who's wearing a kippah. That's the only way. And it was like, what? Like, what? Women can't talk about Judaism. Women can't do Jewish education. Not to mention, like, if you're not,
No,
but even just that image, right? Where he says the only authentic voice, they're not even religious, like, at all. But he said
right,
the only authentic way to really talk about Judaism is you're doing with a man wearing a kippah. And it's like, okay, this is deep. This goes
exactly.
deep into the consciousness. Yes.
And in average, I think like an average, I mean, I'm not talking philosophically about the concept of secular, right? Because that's a whole issue. If there is something like this, or what's the meaning of secular? And I really have a lot of respect to the philosophy of Judaism, but I don't think that's what we see in Israel when it comes to politics. I
Mm-hmm.
don't. I think they actually possess Judaism in a way that who gave you the authority even
Mm-hmm.
to possess, and all this when you see bunch of men in the Hasidics pray together in big events, you see mass of men with black hats and black, and you say like as a woman you don't have any presence there, and it's a lot of patriarchal power, and you see all this old rabbi at the age of 90, 80, and they tell you what to do, how to live your life, even if they have wives rabbi. And so even if secular object it, I don't think they are fully objecting it. So like for example, it's true that less and less people use the rabbanut to get married, but it's not enough. It's not enough for many people to rebel against this idea that having a state that defined itself as Jewish prior to be democratic, and accept that this is a Jewish without questioning the fact that it is orthodoxy, patriarchy, Judaism,
Yeah.
it's part, and
Patriarchy. Yeah.
you are being taught from a very young age to think this way in our songs, in our festivals, in our ceremonies, rituals, everything. It's like it's everything is about this, and I think an average Jew doesn't even understand the differences between the denominations.
So let me ask you a question. So you're talking about, you have this phrase that you use that really influenced me, that you've been using here, about the colonization of the mind. Yes, which I think
Yeah,
is really, wow.
an occupation. Yeah,
Occupation of the mind, right? That was the occupation of the
yeah.
mind. I hadn't heard that phrase until you brought it up in the in our podcast. I mean,
I mean, I don't want to take credit for myself, but I really thought about it by myself, and I was looking all
you should,
over for
yeah,
places who
yeah.
wrote that. I couldn't find it, but
Hmm.
maybe I'm wrong. I'm very modest about it. I even
No,
asked my
yeah,
professor, and he said he never heard about it.
yeah.
So, but for me, that's what it is from a very young age. And just to say other things is the idea that women, for example, cannot sing in public in front of men, but I think
Right.
men can sing in front of women, right?
Yeah, yeah,
Can Orthodox singers think, So what are the odds?
yeah,
Again, you don't have equality even in numbers,
yeah.
So the presence, the public presence that you're talking about, synagogue, Orthodox synagogues, is also the same thing we see on the street. I think like even a man can teach a woman in Orthodoxy, but a woman cannot teach men, right? Am I right
Well,
or
it
wrong?
it depends on what settings, but yeah. Well, teaching is a little less. I
Mm.
would, but I actually I wrote a book about this too. I mean, I wrote a book called "The War on Women in Israel," which looks
You're
at
like
all of
Don Dewey. You wrote a book about everything.
not yet, not yet. I'm still trying. No, no, but I did have
I admire that. I admire that.
but all the things that you're describing about sort of how the Israeli culture and political cultures sort of resemble an Orthodox synagogue. I mean, that's turning. I mean, even the Western Wall, right? All these fights on the Western Wall,
Right.
kind of like the
Exactly.
Western Wall used to be just it still is supposed to be a national monument. It's supposed to be a place, which is it's not meant to be an Orthodox synagogue, but it was sort of co-opted to become an Orthodox synagogue, and everybody sort
Right.
of like accepts it. I mean, except for the people who
Right.
don't. But it's very not most of non-Orthodox Israel accepts the idea that this national space is an Orthodox synagogue, basically, where God forbid a woman comes in and
Or
dressed a
you have a
certain.
rabbi, a male rabbi. Why does a male rabbi define for women how to
Mhm.
dress, what to wear,
Yeah,
how to enter? Who are you? Who gave you? So it's institutionalized, right? It's like the country, the state gave authority to patriarchy to run this country.
yeah,
So even if you look at the military,
military. See,
we're
yes,
not. I mean,
yes,
maybe, right? Only in education. But you know what? Even that, if you're an officer, well, now you have female officers, but let's say the majority it's male officers, right, with high rank in the military. If you want to be a principal in a school, especially I think in junior school or maybe high school, it's much easier and faster route for that male officer to become the principal as opposed to me.
yeah.
I tried to go to that. There is 1 year, I think, training to be a principal. How do they call it? Of Shah, I think, something like this. And anyway, so if I were like an officer, high rank officer in the military, like Ron Huldai, okay, he was a math teacher. I don't say no, but I'm working in education. But that's like a faster route to enter even this position.
Yeah,
And so,
yeah,
what are the odds for women? I mean, I'm saying there's more and more women into it, but the thing is, what I don't accept really, and this is an argument I had also with white feminists in the U.S., not with the black feminists because they have different experience. White feminists say, well, we emulate what we see in order to survive in this world. So in many ways, they embrace some patriarchal patterns because they assume this is their only way to survive in this high in politics or business. I don't accept that. I don't accept this argument at all. It's like there is no transformative way of thinking when you say that, in my opinion. It's not courageous to say we have to work in this world, so we have to emulate these patterns. I don't accept that. I think I cannot accept it. And I think black feminists even strengthen me in that sense because of their life experiences. They actually show different way of looking at things.
mm,
And I mean, I don't want to idealize them, but in many ways, their life experience is different as opposed to white women in the US. And that's why I think many times they offer an alternative.
Mm. It's, I want to go back for a second to something you said a few minutes ago
Mm-hmm.
about the many ways in which patriarchy influences Israeli culture, right?
Mm-hmm.
So you were saying it's not just Israeli culture; it's also the Israeli economic system, and you're talking about
Right.
two sources of patriarchy. We have Orthodox Judaism that has influenced Israeli society, and then you have the military, which is also a massively patriarchal system, patriarchal and violent.
Oh,
Okay,
yeah.
yeah, right. And they both, these are the two most powerful influences on Israeli society. And you were talking about how they influence, first of all, how people get jobs, how people reach leadership. We don't have to look too far for that to see that the higher you get up in the army, like the examples you were giving, the higher you get up in the army, the more likely you'll get the job in high tech, the most coveted
Right.
jobs and all of that, jobs in government and also jobs in education. I didn't even realize in education it
Right.
was that, but it's true. Um, so yeah, so is that's been your experience also, trying to sort of find your way in the education
Right.
system and sort of being held back because of the occupation of the mind, even in
But I
education.
have to say, it's not only in Jewish tradition, right?
Hmm.
It's we see it also in Muslim tradition and Christianity. Uh, if we talk about Israel and this region, we definitely see it everywhere. Look who controls this region. It's mostly toxic patriarchy. And the reason why there are so many wars is because this is the language they understand how to gain respect and victory. And I
Hmm.
think many times it's self victory more than victory that is for the benefit of everyone. I
Yeah,
mean, I don't think nowadays we live with, I don't think we have leadership nowadays. We have rulers, and I don't think they're self image centered and not state centered and not society centered
yeah.
on either side.
Mm. It's interesting because I
And
was thinking that also this week I heard Netanyahu
yeah,
on the radio, and he was saying, and he was using this language, right? You hear this language all the time. If Hamas dares to do whatever it was that he was talking about, we will make life hell for you like you've
yeah.
never seen before. He said, like you can't even imagine. And I'm just like, really? Like, still, they're still trying
Yeah.
this language out? Like, they still do? I mean, it doesn't even mean anything, right? It means nothing. The words like mean
No,
nothing.
it just means that he repeats Trump's rhetoric.
Or maybe Trump is repeating him. I mean, they're both
Oh,
cut from
or
the
yeah,
same cloth. Do you know what I
yeah.
mean? They're both doing this
They,
language, and it's like
yeah.
still,
That's why they can't stand each other, all these men.
but it's all of this like they're talking
It's
in
all
this
about
language.
threat. Yeah, yeah. Well, unfortunately, we did have we even if you look at the radical settlers, mostly men. I'm not saying only the men are doing bad things over there, but they do. Or look at Ben Gvir or Smotrich, or all the Orthodox. I mean, and the very few women you have, there are, except for, of course, Naama Lazimi and Ida Tumami and Efrat, right? And there are very few women that I can really look at. But overall, if you look on the other side in the coalition, it's like a disaster. Like, look at May Golan, and it's not going to help her. You know why? It's not going to help her. She's trying to emulate all this toxic patriarchy, but they will never accept her as equal. And that's what she doesn't get.
Mm,
It's not going to help her. It's not going to help Miri Regev. They will never accept her as
mm.
equal to them.
Did
It's
you
never
see?
going to.
Did you see the story on Miri Regev earlier this year? There was like this 2 or 3 part expose about Miri Regev and how corrupt she is. It was
Oh,
appalling.
yeah, 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 yeah. But
Yeah,
I'm not surprised, as you,
but
women
what?
are not saint.
Yeah, but I'm
Women are
saying, but
human
what was
beings.
interesting in that is that I'm thinking about what you just said about how she's always trying to get up there the level of men and never is.
Right.
And one of the things of that expose is that they found she spends her whole life trying to get photos of her and Bibi Netanyahu together. Like to show that she's like,
Really?
yeah, there was like all these different, like she spends like a lot of her day talk working on photo ops, and the closest she could get as possible. Every time she's like in proximity of the prime minister, she like messages her staff frantically to say
Oh,
get the
yeah,
footage.
yeah, yeah. I remember that.
And it's
So
like she's
absurd.
she's she's in the Knesset, she's a senior member of the party, and she's still like desperately trying to be accepted or be seen as like leadership. It was in a certain way like sad. Do you know what I mean? But I feel like
Well, you
it's
can
you
look
were
at a meal.
yeah.
At a meal, I think, like, if I say it's stereotypically, it's because we see men can do the same thing, right? If you
Yeah.
look at Amir Khana or Nir Barkat,
Yeah.
I mean, I really have zero respect to begin with, to Netanyahu and his family and to this entire, because they don't show any leadership, any courage. Being violent and ever being aggressive and denying any responsibility, it's weakness. It's
Mm,
this indication of people who are not strong inside internally.
mm,
If they were strong enough, they would have the courage to speak differently, to look for a way to reconcile differences, to look for ways to move forward this entire region, to lead and say, here, I'm coming with an offer, with a suggestion. I want to, but there is no genuinity, there is so much weakness. And I think toxic patriarchy, in my opinion, is indication of weakness.
mm. Interesting.
That's what I think, because it's being galvanized and motivated by so much inner violence
Inner
and
violence.
conflict
Right.
that men are, I'm not saying all men, but let's say stereotypically, men are who are being raised as conservative, patriarchal, that's how they're being portraying themselves and exemplify themselves on the outside.
Yeah. And what do you make of the women who are that way too? Like, what is your interpret? Like, because I think this is what might have come up also this comes up a lot in the podcast,
Yeah,
in my
right.
conversations in general, is that we talk about these cultures, right? So there's a culture of patriarchy, and the culture of patriarchy, you know, uh, promotes ideas of gender inequality and also has this
Hmm.
root of violence that you're describing that has occupied the minds not only of many men but also of many women, and then we're trying to make the argument, like in this podcast we try to make the argument that we as women are coming with a different culture, what you call the culture of caring, right? Nell nodding Z, right? Even though we have to talk about Nell nodding still.
Yeah, I
But
say that it's not. Yeah, and
yeah,
I,
so
I actually don't think it's a female thing, caring. I try to emancipate it from the gender.
mhm,
So that's why I say when I talk about patriarchy, it's patterns, stereotypical patterns,
right.
because I don't believe men are being born like this,
Right.
you
Right.
know? And as much
Right.
as women are not necessarily being born as caring, and I think it's even dangerous to assume that women are caring and men are violent. It doesn't give hope. It doesn't, it's breaches instead of bridges,
Mm.
the gaps between people.
Bridges instead of bridges. I like that.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's true. I agree. See,
Yeah,
I have this argument with people all the time, right? When I talk about like gender, when I talk about, gender patterns, I always talk about socialization. It's very important to me not to make the assumptions of us being born a certain way, right?
right.
I try very hard to steer clear of that and to say, when we talk about gender patterns, we're talking about cultures, and we're talking about cultures that we're born into. To be like, oh, what difference does it make? Who cares? Nature versus nurture. And I say it makes a huge difference for a lot of reasons. But one is this like fatalistic thing. Like, are we going to say, oh, well, we,
Exactly.
we were born this way. So, malasoti, this is the way we are. And this is
Yeah,
the way we'll always
so
be. There's nothing to do about it. Whereas
it's
if we
so
say,
deterministic,
yes, yes,
like, let's go to court. I killed my wife because I was born a man, and it
mm-hmm,
shows that my genes are very violent, you
mm,
know, and it's actually taints men as much as making women caring taints women. It
mm,
doesn't allow us to be human beings, and that's why I look at the conflict even from a very, I know I'm not trying to eliminate the differences of Jews and Muslims and Arabs and Jews and all those messy identities that we have here, but there is shared humanity on the
mm,
bottom.
mm,
There are human beings who crave and want and yearn to have good life, and there are so many men who don't want the role of being this heroic soldier. They just want to live well. I mean, we sacrifice men to die
yeah,
on our behalf, and now
yeah,
sometimes it's inevitable. Wars, conflicts are part of us as human beings. There is nothing we can do about it, right? As human beings, we are fraught with conflicts. But if you go to fight and you have cause to fight, it has to be really the last resort,
Mm,
not the first option.
mm,
And everyone says October 7th, the Hamas started. I have no affinity to the Hamas. They are cruel and evil. I have nothing good to say about the jihad and the Hamas. But I am saying that there are so many violent forces in here that it's very convenient for him to have the Hamas as the evil, and it allows them to justify to do horrible deeds
mm,
that eventually can lead us to annihilation,
mm.
because they are very mean, they are very evil, they do
Well,
horrible things. I saw no other land. Yeah.
oh, meaning that leads to us like destroying Gaza? Is that what you're referring to? Like it could
It's
lead.
destroying the Jewish identity, destroying Israel, destroying this entire region. I mean,
Mm,
if one side is not happy, I'm not gonna be happy either.
mm,
But it's there is so many rabbis on the other hand, in the territories, in the occupied territories, everywhere. Okay, I'll tell you the example. For example, everybody were talking about that bookstore in East Jerusalem, right?
mm,
And we always say, what do the Palestinians learn? They learn to have they hate the Jews. And now I'm asking, has anyone looked at the books that these rabbis in certain areas teach about women and about Arabs and about Jews even, that led to the environment that led to the assassination of Rabin? I mean, Yigal Amir, he didn't grow up out of nowhere and become
mm.
assassinator. He
Right,
nurtured something.
right,
And Ben Gvir, it's the same person that
right.
Netanyahu said he had nothing to do with him, brought him into the government, and
Mm.
Smotrich as well.
I mean, there are
So,
rabbis today who are saying it's okay halachically to destroy all of Gaza. Like you have rabbis who are
exactly.
saying there's no such thing as an innocent Gaza, and there's no such just it's okay to kill all 2.2 million Gazans. Like there are rabbis saying that today, like right now.
And they say horrible
Yeah,
thing about Palestinians and about
yeah,
women also. They say
yeah.
horrible thing, and nobody says, and it's okay. It's okay
Mm,
because they're Jews. It's okay,
mm,
you know. And it's much easier for us to look at the Hamas and the Palestinians, and I think that doesn't bring us anywhere. The
mm,
first thing we have to look is inside this country.
mm,
What happened in this country, about how we can have shared humanity as human
mm,
beings. When I talk with Fahra, I love Fahra as a human being.
mm.
I want her to be my neighbor. I don't need this ultra orthodox to come into my building and assume only because he's Jewish I would like to embrace him.
You feel like, so let me ask you a question. You're feeling like what you're suggesting is that this occupation of the mind thing, where like we as Israelis have a particular type of view of what Palestinians are and who Palestinians, we have views about whether it's okay to kill, we have views about violence. So what you're suggesting here is that a lot of it in your opinion comes from orthodoxy, that comes from religious texts and right? Is that what you're saying?
Uh, it's this and historical events. Of course, you have the Holocaust, you have persecutions and fear of Jews, but I think the Bible, the biblical. Now, I actually admire the biblical text. I think it's philosophically a brilliant book, because it has so many conflicts in it and it shows us as human beings, but it doesn't being possessed only by Jews. It's about human being,
Mm,
in my opinion. It's like one of the examples I gave in a proposal I gave right now. It's like, think about Passover, okay? I taught in a conservative Jewish school in Los Angeles, and most of the kids are secular. Their parents just want them to have affinity to Judaism. And as Passover was coming over, they asked me, 21st century kids, eighth grade, asked me, how can Moses depart the water into two? I mean, it doesn't register, it just seems to them impossible, right? And I was having so many questions. And at first I said, okay, I'm in a or conservative school. I have to ask the administration, what do you want me to reply the kids? Because I don't want to say things that go against the policy of the school. And no one helped me. And then I said, I don't need them. I'll just talk to them myself. I said, look, for me, the way I look at Passover is a brilliant holiday that it has nothing to do with Jews. It has to do with us human beings, about slavery and freedom, about the idea that we all have affinity. We all understand the idea of slavery and freedom. It's about human relationships. It's about how we respect each other. And I think having this holiday that celebrates the idea of understanding that freedom, we take it for granted freedom in affluent countries, that you can walk on the street and you can enter a mall and buy anything you want without thinking who made the shoes, what are the ramifications of having these shoes by exploiting kids or women or even men everywhere. I think that's the meaning of Passover that we can take. So that's not about only Jews, it's something the Jews brought into Western civilization, the understanding of the meaning of freedom and slavery. And I think that's a brilliant contribution of Jewish tradition into Western thought. As much as I think having Saturday, it does, you have don't have to celebrate Saturday the way Orthodox say, but the idea that you take one day pause, you can do whatever you want. It's inside. It's this freedom, this, freedom, setting yourself free is internal. It's not necessarily external. You can do whatever you want with this. You can stop worrying on this day. You can meditate. You can celebrate, to see movies. But the very idea that you have a day to pause doesn't mean that you have to stop public transportation and everything. But it's just us as human beings, how we define this day.
So you're trying to say that you're not anti-Judaism per se. You are anti the
No,
occupation of Judaism by Orthodox patriarchal
exactly.
thought.
Exactly.
Mm.
Exactly. I think that every religion had a purpose, and it had a purpose and it developed because people needed that. I don't dismiss that.
Mm.
I just think that institutionalizing it in Israel and giving the authority for Orthodox patriarchy to assume that they actually control the idea of Judaism is horrible because no one gave them the authority.
Well,
Ju- Ju-
they gave themselves a
I'm not.
well, they say they
They
no,
gave
there's
themselves.
a belief that it comes from God, right?
Yeah.
There's a whole,
Okay, I want to see
literature
the
that's
signature of God. I want to see it's the
signature of
signature
God.
of God.
Very good. I like that. Listen, so I want to go back to talking about how the occupation of the mind of patriarchy, like how patriarchy occupies the mind, um, and men's minds and women's minds. So, what do you see as how do you, as an educator, you're an educator and a philosopher, how do you unoccupy? How do we break free from the patriarchy occupying our minds?
Okay, first of all, we never get free totally, of course, because otherwise we wouldn't be human beings. We always have conflicts and we are always ambivalent. We are dialectical. We always have this contradiction in us as human beings,
And also, we're
whether
always in
as a society.
conversation with our histories. I feel like we're always in
Right.
conversation with the place that we came
Exa-
from, right?
Exactly.
Mhm.
Exactly. What I'm saying is that eventually, with all that, saying that there is here and now and future and the compass. And the question is, what is our purpose? What is the compass? I'm not saying that we can wake up one morning and there's not going to be any violence or wars and anything. But we can't live only with this in mind. We
Mhm.
have to think what future we're going to give young generation. Even if it's going to be fully materialized, it doesn't matter if yes or not. It's not the issue. You have to raise children to think about human freedom, shared humanity, prior to anything else,
Mhm.
because even Judaism is being affected by the idea that you put Judaism before human life.
Mhm.
It's not going to help anyone. It's not going to help maintaining Judaism,
Mhm.
and the beauty of Judaism is not going
Yeah.
to be kept like this.
Yeah.
And what I am, and the question you asked me, this is something I'm struggling and grappling with when I teach.
Mhm.
So, for example, I teach in English. Actually, it's sometimes easier for me because I have more examples from the US than in here sometimes, but I teach in English many courses. One of them in nursing school, I teach about gender and cultures in medicine. And
Ooh, ah.
I don't, yeah, yeah, it is big wow.
Mhm.
And and I like very much. I like Patricia Hill Collins has this term that it's called epistemological resistance. I think I even mentioned it in the previous podcast. And so, how do I convince even the female students, right, that we are being governed, and I don't want them to wake up tomorrow and hate someone or hate men. Not at all. I love men. I love human beings in general. I love, and even I even have an abstract that I said now how to avoid teaching to hate, because in many ways we teach to hate, and I don't like that, right? Um, so I give the example of witnesses that she uses in epistemological resistance of Anita Hill, and and I show them the picture, and you probably know that the story, and how she's standing in the hearing, how she's sitting, and then in front of her, a row of white men, senators, right? They're mostly Republicans and Democratic. And have you ever watched the movie?
Led by Biden,
But
incidentally.
led
Yeah.
by Biden. He
Yeah.
apologized at some
Yeah.
point, but there,
Yeah.
and you can see the intrusive and voyeuristic and pornographic questions they
Yeah.
asked this black woman in was it 1991?
Yeah. I think so. Something like that.
Before
Yeah.
social media, but you have CNN. I mean, can you imagine this woman who comes from a very loving family, but her parents are actually I think from a village, poor, and they're not poor, but they're not educated formally, but they're very loving Christian, and they are very Christians, I think. And she comes and they sit in the back. Every time I saw her parents, I started crying. Really, I had tears in my eyes. And she's sitting, this black woman, in front of all these men, white men, asking her a question. And eventually, they took the position, the side of Clarence Thomas, who said you use race. So here is intersectionality: race or women,
Mm-hmm.
black woman or a black man.
Mm-hmm.
So the club of the men took the position of the men, so they
Mm-hmm.
will not be portrayed as racist toward Thomas Clarence. And I showed that to my students, and I can tell you, my female students, when they see this picture and they see parts of it, and I tell them this is 1991. You already have CNN worldwide. You see the cameras, you see the amount of women. Can you imagine as a woman sitting in this position of Anita Hill and asking these intrusive questions?
And then not
And
believing
the
her, not believing her,
hmm?
and also not believing her after
And
all that, not
not
believing
believing
her, not
her,
trusting
right?
her, not siding with her, not giving her support.
Exactly. And really, you did you watch the movie? It's a brilliant documentary, really.
I did not.
And then, so watch it. It's really a great movie. I
Okay.
watched it, and
Okay.
it's like all of a sudden it registers. They look at it, the visuality.
Mm-hmm.
You show them. I'm not telling them, I'm showing them. And I show the questions that they ask her and how they gratify from this question.
Yeah.
Really, I'm sure they gratified from it. It's like when they
Yeah.
asked Clinton, I think had gratification from pornographic gratification from the question he
Yeah,
asked
but
asking, right?
Tammy, 30 years later almost, we had Brett Kavanaugh, right? It's almost the exact same thing.
Right,
It was
right.
almost the exact same
Right,
scenario.
because we don't teach these things, Ilana. We don't teach this thing. We don't teach this thing. We have to integrate them in anything we teach, whether we teach history, whether we teach biblical studies, whether we teach biology, we teach chemistry. I don't care what. It's about human beings, it's about
Right.
relationships, it's about humanity.
But I'm asking you, how did it happen that what we did to Anita Hill, that what we, meaning the collective we, right, did
Right.
to her, with all of the discussion about it and all the, awakening and Me Too and all of that, 30 years later, we do the exact same thing to Christine Blasey Ford. We did the exact same thing. And there too, the men sitting there and even some women didn't believe her, backed the crazy ranting angry man sitting there, and turns him also, like Clarence Thomas, into a Supreme Court justice. How can it be that in 30
Be-
years of some
right.
kinds of evolution, we still have not succeeded in unoccupying our mind, our collective consciousness from all of this
I
patriarchy?
think this is because we do not know how to integrate. We have to be interdisciplinarian, and we have to juxtapose daily practice with theory, with philosophy. This is my method of ethnophilosophy. We have to bring the experience into the classroom. And
Mhm.
when we disconnect it, people assume that what they learn and read has nothing to do with them, even though we had October 7th, okay?
Mhm.
But what does it sit on? It sit on society that has been persecuted for years, that
Mhm.
had the Holocaust experience. And that's why people look and say this was a Holocaust, because this is all we had in our mind, the concentration camps and the Holocaust. By the way, the day it happened, I thought about the Farwood of my parents in Baghdad. So
Mhm.
my parents were Farwood survivors.
Mhm.
So you know the Farwood?
Tell me, do you want to share?
That's the event that happened to the Iraqi Jews in Baghdad in 1941 at the eve of Shavuot, when there was a vacuum. I think there was a void between two regimes. Don't catch me here on the historical aspect.
Mhm.
And so there were like massive Muslims who attacked and slaughtered the Jews in Baghdad. I think like more than 170 died on that 2 days of, it's like a pogrom
Mhm. So it's
pogrom
so
is event.
interesting what you're saying about how
Yeah,
what you're saying is that when events happen, especially let's say big or traumatic events, people fit them in to already established sort of paradigms that are in their head
right,
that often come from educational systems. And so what you're pointing
right,
out here is that education has the potential to plant different things in our brain if done right.
right,
Right, it's very Paulo Freire. Like Paulo Freire talked about the pedagogy of the oppressed. He talked about, the idea that the classroom can be a place where, how it's done, it could be a place
right.
for breaking apart all these sort of accepted norms. But see, what I'm saying is back to what you're saying about education,
Yeah,
right? So education has the
right,
potential to like brainwash, but it also has the potential to unpack, to it has the
right,
potential to occupy us with,
right,
or it has the potential to give us tools to unoccupy, right? That I mean, I think
right,
that this is why, I mean, I feel like this might be what you're saying is exactly why Trump is attacking the education department, because
right,
the education is or can be potentially a tool for resistance, for really breaking things apart, which also is why the bookstore in East Jerusalem was also targeted, because you're looking for
right,
targets of where people gain power for
right.
resisting. And how to I mean, I think what I'm hearing from you, maybe I'm imposing my own preconceived ideas because I also have my
That's
mind
fine.
occupied by things. Okay, but
We are all being occupied.
well,
There is no human being who was
uh,
not born
but we
occupied.
can choose. We can choose of all the things that are occupying our brain. We can make
Yeah,
choices. So I'm choosing this thought, right, based on what I'm hearing from you. And the thought is that education, books, studying can be a tool for deconstructing everything. I mean, I think we hear a lot about this also in people talking about how to fight back against Trump, and also all of this. It's about education and educating ourselves also through books or whatever as a tool for deoccupying our brains. But
right.
right. But also, again,
Yeah,
it's about choosing. Again, it's about choosing of all the things that we that have come into our brain, really making choices to say, do I want this to occupy my brain? Do I want this to be the thing that, you know
hmm,
uh directs me, guides me in my life? Like, we have those choices. We don't have to,
but
yeah.
how do you know about these choices if you live in a very secluded area and you are not
Mm,
being exposed to it?
mm,
Now, for me, human beings are enigma. Also for me, I mean, as a human being, we are an enigma. I
mm,
really don't know what is a human being. In that sense, maybe I will follow the existential thought, guiding thought. Um, whether it's me, Tammy, or whether it's a mix of me, Tammy, and being exposed to other people, I don't know. My metaphor about perfume. Education is like perfume. At any
perfume.
given moment, we don't know how it's going to observe and smell on the body, but we
Oh.
still want to spray a good fragrance, right?
I like that.
that's that's
Educational.
my metaphor about education, right? So I don't know, it's that's what I'm saying. If we set ourselves free to think that when we teach, first of all, to teach is to learn, and to learn is to teach, and we have to be very modest, not to
Hmm.
assume that we have the means and the answer to everything. I'm looking at it as a human being, what kind of life I want to live it.
Mm.
And but there is no ultimate goal, or ultimate goal there is no ultimate solution or ultimate device. And but the way we talk in Israel is very binary. It's like Israelis, Palestinians, Jews, Muslims,
Yeah.
Arabs, Christians,
Yeah.
women, men, LGBTQ. We don't talk about human beings. We don't talk about the ability to share our life. I'm not talking about the geography, but our emotional, our life as human beings. We have different experiences, we have different history. I don't know if I can bridge the history of the Palestinians who experienced the Nakba I don't think they can understand. They know a lot about the Holocaust, which is part of the history of Jewish tradition. It's the Jews from Europe, it's not the Jews of the Middle East, were, yes, affected by the Holocaust for sure, but it's not the entire story of Judaism. So maybe I cannot live their lives and their Nakba, and they cannot live my life as a Jew, and they cannot live my life as a minority Jew in the world, but as a majority Jew here in this region. But it doesn't matter. I cannot live the man cannot live my life as a woman, and vice versa. There is always intersectionality, those who can live this or cannot live that. But I think if you look at women here in Israel, Arab women who suffer tremendously from domestic violence, from killing, uh, I think the most concern they have is about their safety as human beings. There are also people here who care about their safety. So if I have majority Jews and I'm not safe, how does it help me?
Mm.
I can be safer, not safe entirely, but safer when I have conditions, when I create condition as a state that embraces humanity, embraces citizens here as equal, residents as equal as human beings in their humanity, give them respect, talk to people as in respect, because I want people to talk to me with respect as a human being. And if that should be the compass of education, but we don't teach to respect people here in this country. We don't teach to respect.
Yeah. What you're saying is like that we're all in these like little boxes, that we're very like grouped, and that there's
Right,
there's very little place in Israel where you can, I mean,
right.
we've talked about this on our podcast a lot also. Like there's very few mixed cities. You're either in a Jewish town or you're in a, or an
Yeah,
Arab town, or in schools, you either go to the Jewish school, the religious school, the not religious school, or the Arab school. In other words, we're divided we have to
right.
choose our label from so early on, and there are very few places in Israel where you're able to just be.
It's not only in
Yeah.
Israel.
Yeah.
Even, I think I said, the idea of nationality, Palestinians as opposed to Jews. I can't even say Israelis, because Israelis are not only Jewish people,
Mhm.
right? And also being defined, that you have to be defined in this country as a Jew, as a Muslim, as a Christian, as a Palestinian. You cannot be defined as a citizen, as a
Yeah.
human being, first and
Yeah.
foremost.
Right.
Uh,
Can't get married.
it's
I mean, the whole marriage system, like a Jew and a
right.
non-Jew cannot get
It's
married.
patriarchal.
Yeah.
It's patriarchal. It's the biology takes over the sociology.
Mm.
It's because conservative men can feel. I mean, if you think in a very primitive way, it has nothing to do with Jews only and Muslims and Christians, human beings, the very basic primitive way of gender socialization over centuries is that the way men could prove that they're men, if the woman is virgin and they prove that they
Right.
penetrated, right? And if she get pregnant, and you have to know, why does she have to be a virgin? Because he has to prove everyone that this is his child, because it's masculinity, and that's in the very primitive, shallow, redundant, shallow manner, I'm saying, right? That he had, if you think of orthodoxy, right? That he has to prove that she was a virgin. And how much pressure is on a man
Right.
that needs to prove that he can penetrate,
You know, I'm
right?
just I'm just thinking about the word in Hebrew for male. The word in Hebrew for male. I don't know where I read this. I wish I could cite book I read that where I learned this. The word in Hebrew for male is zachar, which is the same root as zecher, which means
Mm-hmm.
memory, to be remembered. And it comes from this, what you're describing, because to
Wow.
be male is to be remembered through your seed becoming,
Wow,
living
that's
on.
interesting.
Yes. Tammy, we have
Yeah.
to close our talk. This will be our last question. What do you think about when we do all women's things like this all women's podcast, for example?
Right.
What do you think of that?
That's a good question. Okay, no, in many ways, I think it's essential because we don't have enough places to raise our voices without being taken by men who have better knowledge because they're in the army or in business and everything. And also, they're being raised to assume that they know more. But so within time, so right now it's important. The thing is that I would like to ask you and think about how we can promote it to be more dominant and to be equal, and even more than having all these podcasts with men who talk about the war and about political affairs, because our voice is so important.
Mhm. Yeah. What do you think? What do you suggest?
I have some thoughts. I have some ideas.
Yeah. Like the question about how do we go from being in our secluded all female space where we have the power to do things
Hmm.
like lift up the Torah and say whatever it is that we need to say. How do we go from that, bringing that into the places of where power is, where power rests, where decisions are being made? To be
Thank you
continued,
so much
Tammy.
for the.
Thank
All
you.
right, thank you. Take care.
Bye.
Bye.
You've been listening to the podcast Women Ending War. If you like this, please subscribe, share, like, and comment. Links to our channels on YouTube, Spotify, and Apple are below. Follow us on Facebook, Instagram, and Substack. In peace, salam, and shalom.